I don't know whether you've noticed it, if it's just dawned on you yet, but it's June. It may not feel like it outside, but it is June. And if you were making some resolutions in January or whatever you want to call them and saying, hey, I'm going to do some things this year and going to do them different, you're almost halfway out of the year. So if you're going to do those things, man, we got to get busy. We got to do those things because the year is just slipping away. If you wanted 2023 to be a special year, you know, it's just a question for us is, as the time just keeps racing by, it seems so fast, why haven't we done some of the things we had set aside that this is what I'm going to do this year? I'm not saying you haven't, but I'm saying you got to ask yourself, what am I doing that I'm not getting those things done? And that's a good question, but it's not the most important question. Andy Stanley years ago wrote a book entitled The Best Question Ever. What could be the best question ever? Because we have a lot of questions, don't we? You know, we question a lot of things. Depending on who you're married to, you may get asked a lot of questions. You know, if your spouse, you know, likes to ask questions and have information, it's a lot of questions. You know, where should I go to school? What career should I choose? Should I take this job? Should I do this? Should I get married? Which college should I go to? Should I eat Mexican before this 5-hour road trip? You know, it's just a lot of questions that we have and things we ask. But it is not the question, the most important one. The most important question is this: what is the wise thing to do? And if you think about all the things that you've done and all the decisions you've made, if we have asked this question before we made those decisions, what is the wise thing to do? If you're like me, things would have turned out probably a lot different. You know what I think is one of the heaviest things to carry in life? Regret. It's one of the heaviest things to carry through life is regret. And one of the things that can minimize the regret that we carry in life is wisdom. Wisdom. So we don't make some of the decisions. I bet this guy regretted this tattoo very quickly. No regrets. I love that. You know, regret is a heavy weight. And it's tough to carry, and wisdom is a key to avoiding tremendous amount of regret in our life. Well, you see, nobody plans on messing up their life. Nobody plans on messing up their life, having regrets. But if we do not ask this question at the beginning, the front side of our decisions, what is the wise thing to do? I guarantee you on the back side of our decisions, we're going to be asking a question, why did I do what I did? We're going to be talking about wisdom on either side of it. And wisdom is not an intellectual thing per se. It's not necessarily from being smart or because very smart people can do extraordinarily dumb things. Bill Gates, very intelligent man, very rich man, $116 billion is his worth. But several years ago, you probably remember what was revealed, that he had been spending a great deal of time with a convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. Remember when that all hit? When everybody's names started coming out that they had been associating with him, Bill Gates' name came up as well. And of course, he made a statement that he regretted that. He called it a lapse in judgment, said it was a huge mistake, and even admitted that it played a part in the ending his marriage to his wife of 27 years because she had been very opposed to him spending time with Epstein. But why do people like Bill Gates make those decisions? Why do people like Greg Sexton make some of the decisions? And you fill in the blank, the name. Why do we make some of the decisions we do? I'm convinced it's because some of the things that make us wise, we do not think are needed to make us wise, and we overlook those things. James helps us see some things, to identify some things that will make us wise, and even what wisdom is. And as we continue our study of the book of James, and it'll run through this month, we want to look today in James chapter 3. We'll spend all of our time there for about 5 verses. James chapter 3, verse 13 is where we're going to begin. And James just starts it out with a question. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." Notice that. James says wisdom isn't defined by a book or degree. There's a 71-year-old man who lives in Michigan. His name is Michael Nicholson. He has 29 college degrees, including 22 master's degrees. When it is all counted up, he has been in school for 55 years of his life. And he just retired from his job as a parking lot attendant so he could, as he says, go to school full time. I'm not saying that Michael Nicholson is not a wise man, but I am saying that 29 degrees doesn't necessarily mean you're a wise person. You may be educated. James says wisdom isn't just knowledge, but a lifestyle. Wisdom is a lifestyle. How we live, the decisions we make, not just knowing, but doing. And James starts that with a question. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" And this may be a question he's asking it because maybe he's been hearing in the churches that people have been promoting themselves as very wise. And James just starts it off by asking that way. And throughout the Bible, when you see the phrase wise or understanding, they're combined many times, wise and understanding. I love what Jesus said. You know, Jesus was just criticized for everything he did. No matter what he did, mostly it was the religious elite would criticize him for what he was doing. No matter what he did, he couldn't win. And in Matthew 11, Jesus addresses this. He talks about it. Matthew 11, verses 18 and 19 says, "For John came neither eating or drinking, and they said, he has a demon." Remember, John stayed out in the wilderness preaching. They said, "Oh man, something's wrong with him." Jesus says, "But the Son of Man came eating and drinking." And they say, "He is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." But I love what Jesus says right here. He says, "But wisdom is proved right by her actions." He says, he's saying, you can say anything about John. You can say anything about me, but just sit back. Wisdom will be proved right by what we do. Wisdom shows itself. You don't have to tell people you're wise. People will know you're wise by how you live. That word, look at that word humility. It almost seems like it may be out of place here. You're going, I thought we were talking about wisdom, and now he jumps to humility. Well, this is so important because, you see, unless you're humble and able to listen, able to be taught, if you're arrogant and conceited, you don't listen to anyone, you don't listen to anything. But if you're humble, the door's open to be taught, to learn. Cameron Williams, you probably heard this name in the news this past week. Cameron Williams, 18 years old, just graduated from high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Went to the Bahamas with a group of friends, and on one evening, an evening cruise on Bahamas, several hundred teenagers on this cruise boat, and reports say that he was dared to jump over the side and just to swim. Reports also said that some of his friends physically tried to stop him from doing it. But some of the phone video shows that he jumped overboard, somebody threw a life ring, and he didn't swim to it. He swam away from it in the darkness, and he was never seen again. If he had just listened, if he had just been able to say, this isn't a wise thing to do in the darkness out in these waters, to jump overboard and swim, life would have been different. There's more to wisdom than humility, but it begins with humility. Look what James says in verses 14 through 16. He says, "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." He uses that phrase, bitter envy. Envy is discontent and resentfulness aroused by the possessions or position or advantages of another person. In other words, when you look and see them, it makes you dissatisfied with yourself and then ultimately with them. It robs us of our contentment. It robs us of our relationships. We tend to think that personally we do not envy people. That's for somebody else to envy, that we do not suffer from those things. See, that's what makes it such an even more deadly sin, is because we really don't think that we're capable of it. There in the writing and throughout the Bible, when you talk about envy, it's closely followed by selfish ambition, promoting yourself, putting yourself out front, seeking attention for yourself. You ever thought about it that it's hard, if not even impossible, to like and especially love someone that you envy? To like and love someone that you envy? You see, it blurs our vision. It blurs our vision of how we should look at ourselves. When we look in the mirror, we should be examining our lives. But if we're eat up with envy and selfish ambition, as he says, we don't see ourselves the way God wants us to. And we definitely don't see people the way God wants us to see them. Envy is possible in every person's life, in every age, in every stage and position in life. You know how we are. We're able to do those things. I've said this before, so I realize I'm repeating myself what we said sometimes in the past. But you know how we are. When someone brings up somebody else or their accomplishment or their house, they'll say, "Yeah, he's a really nice guy." And all we got to do is say, "If you say so." What, you know something I don't? Well, man, do you see that house they live in? That is beautiful. Well, if I did what they did, I might could have a house like that too. What, you know something I don't know? What? Somebody can say something, and all you got to do is go, and that's it. You ain't got to say anything else, and you've planted doubt into somebody's minds. Envy is possible in all of us. And I'm going to be totally transparent with you here. Preachers can be the worst. I've seen this my entire life. You'll hear about a church that's really growing, they're doing good, and somebody say, "Well, if you don't preach the gospel, the hard truth, you can grow a church like that." You say, "What, they don't preach the gospel there?" Yeah, that church is really doing great. Well, if I had 6 youth ministers, I could do it too. They really? Yeah. Oh, if I had a building like that, preachers do it too. We can slip that envy in there. The Olympics, which we celebrate every 4 years, has been going on for about 3,000 years, started in 786 BC. And one of the legends or stories that came out of that time, of those early times, in one of those Greek villages where the Olympics grew out of, there was one of the athletes that was just a hometown hero, and he had won so many of the games that they wanted to put up a memorial, a statue to him in this town. But there was also a rival to him that was from that area, and it just ate him alive that every day he had to see this statue of his rival. And it just began to eat him up, and he would go out at night and look and tinker and think as to how he could destroy that statue, how he could topple it over. And he succeeded one night. He toppled the statue over. The only problem is it fell on him and crushed him to death. But that's envy. That's what envy does to us. And James warns us of a wise person. You can't have envy in your life. Look at verse 17. He says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. It's almost like he mentions the wisdom again here, just to remind us, hey, these may not be sounding like things you think add up to what wisdom is, but I want to tie it together. And he connects dots for us again here. And this is one of the best descriptions of a wise life. These 8 things that he mentions here. And in the few minutes we got left here, I just want to quickly mention some things about this list that James gives us. He says, first off, that wisdom is pure. There's no hidden agendas to wisdom. That it's not a self-promotion. It's not ulterior motives to what we say. Our actions and our intentions actually match up. He says that wisdom is peace-loving. It's not trying to stir a problem up. It's not trying to agitate things. It's not trying to bring friction or drama into a situation, but rather it's trying to bring peace to whatever situation we're in. He says wisdom is considerate, that you see others first. I got to tell you this, what happened to me this week. I was up in Tarboro, so I'm 30 minutes away from here. Shows you a preacher can't go anywhere and do anything bad. Somebody's going to catch you. But I was in Tarboro, and I was walking out of Walmart, and I saw a lady just finishing up, putting her stuff into the car, and I said, ma'am, I'll take your basket if you want me to, because the rack was a little ways from her car. And she goes, well, thank you very much. And then she goes, are you a preacher? I said, well, yes, I am. I said, in Williamson. And she just smiled, and she went on and told me that I didn't know her real well, and hadn't seen her in years, but I went to college with her brother, and she recognized me. So we got to stand there in the Walmart parking lot and just have a nice conversation, because just something considerate. 15 minutes later, a guy goes, are you a preacher? So, like I say, I can't even go out of town and mess up. I gotta be. But anyway, considerate. A good translation of what it says here is that considerate is always gentle or patient in the sense of being concerned with other people and not your own rights. Sweet reasonableness. He goes on, he says, wisdom is submissive. Wisdom begins with our being willing to submit to God, and then everything grows out of there. Wisdom isn't power hungry. Wisdom yields to God. It says, God, you have the first say-so in my life. That I'm going to do what you want to do. Not my will, but your will be done. He goes on, he says, wisdom is full of mercy. It is caring about others who are going through difficult times. Now, this is the full thing of mercy. More specifically, mercy is about how you treat someone when you are in a position of power over them, where you don't have to treat them a certain way. It's how you treat people that you have authority or power over. As Eric said earlier, as Memorial Day has just passed by, I found myself reading stories about particularly World War II. Charles Brown, on his first flight as a B-17 bomber pilot in World War II, glanced out his cockpit to the right and saw something that made just fear go through his body. And before he could say anything, his co-pilot said, "Dear God, this is a nightmare. He is going to destroy us." Because as he looked out their cockpit of this B-17, there was a German fighter had pulled up beside them. And see, what was so bad on their bombing run over Germany, this 21-year-old West Virginia farm boy, the plane that they were flying had been heavily damaged by flak and by other fighters. Part of the fuselage was blown away. Only 2 of the guns worked, as most of the men were wounded. 1 was dead. And they were defenseless in the skies, just trying to limp their way back to the coast. But instead of this German pilot closing in for the kill, just stayed beside them and just flew escort for them all the way back to the shoreline. And as they approached going out over the ocean to go back over to England, it said this German pilot just gave a little salute and nodded his head. Mercy had won over triumph. When Charles Brown got back to his base and told his superiors what had taken place, they said, "You can't tell anybody. We can't add in the human side of this." The German pilot, Franz Steigler, never told a soul because he knew that he would have been court-martialed for what he did or failed to do. But 43 years later, Charles Brown began to look for the man who had spared his life and the life of his crew. It took 4 years, but then a phone call came in, and it was Franz Steigler. And they talked about that day that they said they had both never forgotten. They became close friends, and for the next 19 years, spoke every week until they died in 2008, just months apart from each other. Mercy is wisdom. Wisdom, he says, is full of good fruit. Your life should be littered with good acts and deeds, not just one thing. Think about it with your family and friends. Some of you probably have done it this weekend. When you get together, do you just usually tell one story, or is it just one story after the other? It's one story after. You just keep telling stories and laughing, and it's what James says our life should be. Is that when we talk about the things, the good things that have happened, it should be one thing after another. Your life should be littered. He says wisdom is impartial. You're not a respecter of persons or a color of skin. You're not judgmental. He says wisdom, finally, is sincere. Sincere means authentic. And as we began our study of James at the 1st of May, the first thing we said is that James is looking for authentic Christians. One more verse I want to look at here as we close out. Verse 18. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Harvest. Now, you may not be a farmer, but living in a farming community, we understand the harvest, don't we? We understand that at time of year. We understand that as you're bringing the harvest in, and it is the celebration time, it is the reaping of our hard work for the months before. And James says that peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. James has given us two different definitions. He has given us wisdom defined by the world and the devil, or wisdom defined by God. He says, and you choose. So our question we end up with today is, what is the best question ever? It's what is the wise thing to do? And what is the wise thing to do? You know. Just like I know. What God leads us to do. What God has told us to do. We just need to do it. Our life needs to be a lifestyle of wisdom.